good to see you today. We are going to start our work session, and board colleagues, I sent out an agenda. I think that I would like to call the school board work session for Tuesday, March 11th to order. The topic is going to be reimagining education. So let's take roll real quick. Ms. Alonso?
Here.
Oh, do you want me to? Sorry. Okay, got it. Ms. Knox? I'm going in alphabetical order. That doesn't work.
Here.
Ms. Campos, I should have done that.
Here.
Ms. Martirano?
Here.
Dr. Mayberry Mays?
Here.
Mr. Dix?
Here.
Ms. Norris? Here. All are present. So this is an exciting meeting for us to talk about reimagining education. I want to frame the conversation accordingly. We have set aside about an hour to an hour and a half to really dig into this topic and make sure that there's a lot of understanding. The most important thing I think we want to focus on for this meeting is process and timeline. If there's time, we'll talk about some of the other stuff, but I think that's really important. I think a lot of us are starting to get questions, excitement, but greater understanding about how this is all going to be mapping out in even just the next 3 months. So with that, is that an appropriate framing?
I think that's perfect.
And anything else you want to say, board colleagues, I sent the list of questions to Matt and Dr. Roberts. Some may be answered, some may not be answered. And anything, Dr. Roberts, you want to add?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I want to provide a little bit of sort of guidance around the run of show for tonight in terms of how we plan to spend our time together. We have with us this evening Beth Grove and Emily Kolb, attorneys from Allers and Cooney Law Firm, who will provide the board with information about issues that must be addressed during a rather critical time of this process, and that's around the general obligation bond election, during which time the board will have an opportunity to ask clarifying questions and gain sort of a better understanding of what is expected or what is required. Immediately after that, Matt and I will certainly share and engage in a conversation by presenting to the board a presentation on process and timeline around the Reimagine Education Plan, where we are going to respond as well to some additional board questions that you've shared with us and some community questions. The response to the board questions tonight is really intended to provide clarity in the process timeline of Reimagine Education as we move forward. We also want to make sure that by engaging with the board, we can benefit from your thought leadership, which is really critical and essential to our work moving forward during this time. Additionally, it should be noted that the DMPS team, in terms of framing, completed a 19 community meeting tour where CISO, our strategic partner with whom we engaged in some structured conversations to highlight strengths, challenges, opportunities, and any other concerns or other aspects of the plan. And that 19 community meeting tour ended about a week ago. And the goal of that tour was to really gather feedback from just about the district's Reimagine Education Plan from students, teachers, staff, leaders, and community members. Finally, I want to share that CISO, as our strategic communication partner, who has supported us throughout this process, collected community feedback through an set of in-person engagements, virtual engagements, and an online survey. And following that 19 meeting tour that I just referenced, they received input, feedback, they analyzed that input and feedback, and on your table, one of the documents that Matt shared with you is that engagement summary report, which will provide lots of insights into where we are and how we're going to move forward.
That's a wonderful frame. Is this online yet, or are you going to share a
Yeah,
little
we
bit
were going to
about
share it with you guys first and then make sure that.
what the process
yeah,
is?
This
Okay.
week. We'll share it this week.
Great, thank you.
With that said, I think I want to invite up our Allers Law Firm attorneys to come and kick it off.
Thank you. And again, my apologies
Yeah,
for
either
being
right here.
late.
Yep.
Very sorry about that.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Beth Grobe. I'm an attorney at the Allers Law Firm. I've been with the law firm, and I specialize in school finance. Emily Colby here has been with our firm for 9 years now, I was gonna say 7. And she has been working with me in school finance. I was explaining to Dr. Roberts, I remember when Gary Wojcicki was your superintendent, that's when I started practicing law last century. And you guys are looking at me with blank stares, you have no idea who he is.
The name.
That was probably 5 superintendents ago. Anyway, so today, the important thing for we did a little timeline memo, which you have a copy of. The most important thing as you look at your plan for the future is to figure out what's our priorities. I assume the plan maybe prioritize some of your projects, but the most important thing for the district to do at this point in time is prioritize your projects and figure out how you're going to fund them. So you have 3 pots of money, right? Sales tax revenue, PEPAL money, physical plant and equipment levy, and a general obligation bond. What are you going to do first, and how are we going to fund it? Are we going to use half of our sales tax, half of our PEPAL? I don't know what the mix is, but I assume the district should be, you should make that decision, which projects come first. And as far as writing the question, I don't know where you're at in the process, if that's been determined or not, but that is a big step. And it's probably the most important step. The other thing I would encourage you to do, I have never met a school district that fully implements their 10-year plan. Somewhere along the line, it changes, right? Because of population shifts, funding shifts, whatever happens. So I think it's important that you prioritize your projects and figure out what are we going to fund with general obligation bonds? What can we do in the first 5 years, right? Whether that's, and it could be a combination of all 3 pots of money. But figure that out, put those projects that are going to be funded with the general obligation bonds in the petition language. And then the plan is it's a living, breathing document, right? It should continually be updated. So when you go for the last 5 years, that might be a very different plan than what you started with.
Beth, if it's okay if I can ask a couple clarifying
sure.
questions? Because I've worked on a bond, so I'm more familiar maybe than others, but I just want to make sure. So when you talk about the question, it's the same thing as the language, right? That would be
Correct.
on the bond, and the petition is,
The petition, so the bonds are issued pursuant to Iowa Code Chapter 296, okay? I think one of the questions said it was 298. It's 296. 296 requires that a petition be presented to the board. We have to include the amount of the bonds to be issued and the projects to be funded with those bonds. The projects do have to be completed that are contained in that petition language. The question on the petition becomes your ballot question. There's no changing it. Once the petition begins to circulate it, nobody, even the board, can't change it when it's presented. So would it be helpful if I gave you like a whole procedural overview? Would that be
I'll
helpful?
defer to others. Would you like that, the whole process? Would that be helpful?
Okay. So
Yeah, and just one other, if you could also address the specificity of the language. So for example, elementary schools or 2 elementary schools or specific names
Right.
of schools. So if you could touch on that also. Thanks.
So, generally speaking, the voter has to have a substantial degree of certainty on the projects they're voting for, okay? So we don't have to say, we can say we're going to do security improvements at all elementary buildings. That would be sufficient. We don't have to say, or if you're building a classroom addition, we don't have to say we're building an art classroom, a 300 or 3,000 square foot multipurpose room. You don't have to get that specific. The Iowa courts have recognized, that we need to have a little flexibility here. So the question, when you're putting the question together, I've sent, I don't know, I think I sent to Dr. Smith some examples. Sometimes you just want to say we're doing additions and remodeling these buildings, and we'll list these buildings. but that's really all you'd have to say. We'd put remodel, repair, improve, and equip, furnish and equip, something like that. These buildings, if you're building additions, then we would add that to certain buildings. But the petition language, we should spend a lot of time together talking about that, because that is very important, because you have to do those projects. You can't not do those projects, because that's what you told the voters, and we certainly do not want to mislead the voters.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so the petition, so that's why determining the scope of the projects, the estimated cost, how we're gonna fund these projects together as a whole becomes very important, and you should spend some time a lot of time deciding that right now. Once we work on the petition language, we can probably, depending on how much time everybody has and where you're at in the process, that can take 2 weeks, a month, whatever. It's very quick on our end. You just need to let us know. We can draft something and get it to you, review it. It's pretty quick on our end. It's your end that takes a lot of thought and time. Once the petition language is drafted, we'll put it in a final petition form. The petition has to be signed by 25% of the number of people who voted at the last election of school officials, which would be the November 23 election, unless you've held an election to fill a vacancy since then. So it would be the November 23. So it's the number of ballots cast, not the number of votes cast. The number of votes cast is substantially larger, because if there were 2 directors, each person could cast 2 votes, when in reality, so we work with Polk County Auditor, who's your controlling county auditor, also the Commissioner of Elections. We can work with them to determine how many people voted, and then 25% of that number. That's how many signatures you need. The petitions are then returned in to the district. The board secretary is responsible for verifying the signatures. And you should get substantially more than, let's just say, you had 10,000 people vote, you need 2,500 signatures. I'm just using round numbers here. Get at least 3,000, because people will forget, they'll forget to include their address, or they'll live outside the district and sign your petition. Those are very common things to have happen. So the board secretary needs some time to verify signatures, but once sufficient number of signatures are obtained, then the petitions are presented to the board, and the board adopts a resolution to call the election on November 4th. The deadline for delivering that signed resolution, this is the deadline, the date that cannot be moved, is September 19th of 2025 for a November 4th election this year. So you have some time. I don't know how many signatures you need, but I would say it's most likely substantially more than 2,500. And it'll take time to gather those.
Did you say that's in school board elections or municipal elections?
No,
'Cause
it's only, it's the last election of school officials, so it would
okay.
have been your November 23 election.
But because there are undervotes in schools, you're using the school number, not the municipal. Yeah.
Correct, yes, correct.
Just a question on the timeline. The petition must be drafted, and you suggest by May 15th, if I'm if I'm reading that right.
Right.
And then the circulated and signed complete by July 15th. May 15th is not a legally binding, it's more, this is your recommendation to be successful in the process.
The only date in this memo that is hard and fast is the September 19th date. Every other date has give and take to it.
Great, thank you.
So, once the petition is presented to the board adopts it to call the election. That's when I think I sent an FAQ about the responsibilities of board members, and you now have a ballot issue, which means public resources cannot be spent to expressly advocate for or against a ballot issue. The ballot issue occurs as soon as the board adopts the resolution to call the election.
Clarifying question, is there advocacy restriction, there's education and advocacy?
You are always able to, in your personal capacities, you are always able to express your opinions, vote yes, whatever. When you're a school board or you're not, the law allows you to adopt as a board a resolution supporting the passage of the bond issue, but in your role as board members, you're not allowed to expressly say vote yes. You can encourage people to vote. You can always provide facts to people. The Iowa Ethics and Campaign Disclosure Board is the agency responsible for enforcing this statute. And they have recognized that a superintendent's job is not a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job, right? So they've said, as long as you're the superintendent and you're out there giving speeches, as long as you say, here's what we're going to do with the money, here's plan A, here's plan B, please go vote.
Yeah, so the
Absolutely.
difference, though, is in the vote yes.
You cannot
Versus-
expressly advocate
Right.
vote yes or vote no, but you can encourage people to vote.
Does anybody have questions on that?
So that's really it. And then November 4th would be your election date. And this, this assumes there will be no election law changes this year. Legislature has, changed it almost every year over the last 5 years. So this is as the law stands now. I'm not anticipating any, but I never anticipate any.
60% is the,
60%. The GO bond question has to pass with 60% approval.
in my head, I'm just trying to think through the difference between municipal and school. Again, is it 60% of school
Of
voters or?
It's the number of votes cast in the school on
the
that
ballot
question,
question.
just on that question.
Oh, just on that question.
Just on that question. So you'll probably have directors up. Those are different questions. We
Yep.
just need 60% approval on this question.
So 100 people vote. We need 60 of them
On this question.
on that
Yes.
question. Very different than if 3,000 vote for a director. It's just whoever votes on that question.
Yes.
Okay.
So if they cast a ballot, but they do not vote yes or no for the bond, that is excluded from the total?
That's an undervote, you're right.
That's how I understand it.
Thank you.
You made a comment about 5 years, and I'm trying to just process the comment, and it was as it relates to the bond and changes and things like that. Does that mean something that 5-year?
It's just a general rule of thumb I've seen happen. Usually, your highest priority projects, they're not usually constructed in a year or two. They usually take, 2 to 3 years to complete. And you're not going to start all the projects today, right? You're also going to have to make sure you have construction inflation included in your cost estimate. So I would just encourage you at 5 years to, maybe do the first 5-year projects and then figure out, it could be that your remaining 5-year projects are the same, right? I would hate to have you put something in a ballot question that you have to do when you decide, oh, I don't need that anymore.
To be more explicit, are you suggesting considering doing 2 bonds potentially?
Perhaps if
Is
that's how you decide to fund them,
Okay.
correct? Like I said, you have 3 pots of money, so you can decide, these are our most important ones and they get funded first. The bonds are also going to be issued on a tax exempt basis, which means, this is a little confusing. So when you have a bond, you have a principal payment and an interest payment. The principal payment, the purchaser of the bond receives the principal payment. That's not income because it's principal. The interest income, however, is income. It is exempt, at least right now, from federal income tax, meaning the purchaser doesn't pay any federal income tax on that interest payment, which is why even today you have a very low interest rate. We're seeing what, maybe high threes, low fours interest rates on general obligation, tax exempt general obligation bonds, which is much different than, say, your mortgage, which is at 7.5%, because that interest is taxable, right? So there are a lot of rules surrounding the issuance of tax exempt bonds. One of them being, you, generally speaking, have to spend all of the proceeds of your bonds, which includes investment earnings, within a 3-year period. So if you, for example, issued $100 million in 2025, June of 2025, you'd have until June of 2028 to spend all those. And that's actually a lot of money to spend, right? And if you don't reasonably expect to spend that money, then we're not going to issue $100 million of bonds. We're going to issue maybe $50 million and do it over a couple-year period. So it's not like you get the bonds and you just say, oh, we're going to issue $500 million today. That's not how it's going to play out.
But to be clear, though, using the $50 million example, you're asking, let's just say for $150 million, you're just drawing it down at different
Right,
points.
we're doing 50 million this year, we might do 50 million the next year and 50 million the next year, which actually gives you 5 years of funding, right? Are we clear on that? Yeah, okay.
Clarifying question, Beth, thank you. And so as I sort of review the timeline, I'm thinking about statutory obligations that the board has for this process. And one is to review and adopt the resolution September 1, and then September 19, that date that we've all circled, it's the filing of the resolution. Is it the same as the board?
Nomination papers. That is the date
Yes.
that nomination papers for board positions, it's actually noon on September 19th.
Got it, thank you.
Now, I do want to make sure you realize if for whatever reason you choose to go to September or November of '26, that is a federal election, and that deadline moves to August 26th. Okay? So it's not the same 46 days because it's a federal election.
A question, I don't know if Dr. Roberts, if this is where you're going. One of the things that's been on my mind, and I think others, is how do you, if a vision and a plan is cast and voters, for the most part, are voting on something based on the plan that was articulated. How does that withstand new board members, new superintendent, new staff, right? Is it, I think that, yeah, that's the question. I mean, just by specifically naming the buildings isn't exactly the whole plan. And so I just ask if you have any recommendations on that. Like, you want a plan that is flexible to adjust to blips, but not overturned based on political wins or.
Sure. Well, I will say 296.6 does say that if the voters approve the bonds, the board must issue the bonds. It's a shall, right? They shall issue the bonds. They shall go forward with this plan. The problem is if people come in and whatever you've issued bonds for will have to be completed because that's what you told the voters, right? So that has to happen. Usually for people to come in and disrupt the facilities plan,
It's pretty hard.
it's hard and it's expensive. It is very expensive to say, no, we're stopping that and we're going to redo the whole plan. That is a lot of money that you will have to spend for a whole new plan, if you will. Now, it's one thing to update the plan. It's another thing to put in place a whole new plan.
Thank you. I think one of the other clarifying questions that we have been seeking is the board's role in the actual approval of either the facilities plan overall versus their role in approving, for example, consolidation or physical changes or closures of schools. What is the board's role in both of those instances?
The board needs to approve the closing of the schools. It's the board's job basically to set the attendance centers, right? That's a whole different statutory obligation. So, do you want to talk about school closures? Can you? There are procedures that you need to follow before a school can close. Obviously, you're not going to use bond money to close a school. It's part of your plan. Sure. I would think the board would want to know what the facilities plan was. How are we going to spend our GO bonds, save money in Pepple, right? So you should have a working knowledge of the plan, and you can approve it, you can accept it, you can whatever you want to do with it. There's no requirement that you formally approve it, but I would certainly think that if you want your community to vote for a plan, the board should support the plan. Right?
If I may add, please correct me
Yep.
if I'm wrong. In conversations with Miriam as well, guidance would be that there would not necessarily be a formal vote of approval in a plan at this point, because it suggests that that approval is also approving the closure of buildings many years in advance. And by making a formal approval without actually having met with the community in a documented, guided process that gives voice to that community, to the students and families impacted, we run the risk of abusing that discretion of the board. And so it puts potentially the board at risk of having that approval be appealed to the Department of Education. So that being said, if in the event we advance the plan as it's currently drafted today, if a school is identified for closure or retirement in year 7, we would begin having those conversations with community the year prior, specifically with that community, and the board would vote the year prior to having that formally be a retired building or a closed building.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, Mr. Dix?
just a clarifying question then. I want to make sure that I'm clear on the separation of these two questions of school closings and the plan to build or renovate schools. You said a future board really can't change the plan to build or renovate schools, but a future board could come in, if I'm understanding correctly, and say, no, we are not closing those schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's important to keep separate the two, one, the resolution that we're talking about for a GO bond election, it's a standalone document that the board will adopt, deliver to the county auditor. That becomes a ballot question. But then the facilities plan in terms of closing buildings, things like that, is a separate process, I guess I would
And
say.
a separate issue. It is not included in the ballot language.
Right.
Correct, but the perception to the public is actually, they don't necessarily discern that, right? I mean, the plan is a full plan that is both the new and the refurbished and the potential closures. I hear what you're saying, but I think in the mind of a voter, I'm not sure that they discern it that way. Ms. Martirano?
My question was going to be around that whole plan as an umbrella plan. Would you then, Matt, bring to us a plan that would not name those specific buildings, but identify the potential closure of a building or multiple buildings without naming them? Would that put us both, would that give us the ability to, as a board, approve this plan and show confidence in this plan to our voters and to our community, but then also protect us in following all the legal statutes regarding a specific building closure?
Yeah, I think that's one way that would allow us to have the board vote on it, absolutely. I'd like to meet with Miriam a little bit to just make sure that our language is accurate and follows the letter, but I think that's absolutely a potential path forward.
Thank you.
And I think I'm kind of going to look for some head nods, Ms. Martirano, even based on what you said. is the goal that ideally the plan that, for the most part, people are visualizing, and the reason that they will choose to support or not support the bond, that somehow that plan is codified or seen for new board members or new staff, that it's got some, I mean, it's not a legally binding document, but is that what you're looking to kind of get at? Like, I'm trying, so for me, like, I'm going to say what I think, and then you tell me, like, for me, I want to know if the plan has been informed by the community, and a lot of work's been done, and a lot of thought's been done on it, and the money, you know, all those things, that give or take a few headwinds, that's the plan that's going to be followed over the next 5 years or 7 years. And so my question is, how do you codify that in some way? Is that what you're asking as well?
It is, whether it's a resolution showing support of the district decision. I think that many of the items that have been presented to us in Reimagining Education fall under operations and
Program.
exactly. And so for me, I think it is important for us to understand how we believe that this plan is going to improve student outcomes. And I think that you've presented that to us, but I also think that it's important for the board to show support of your plan to improve student outcomes as well in this way. I know in the past, the community, when a big decision has been made, it's been difficult for the community to understand perhaps a decision that the superintendent and team have made versus the board having made a decision. And I would like to show support under the board's role and view it from that lens so that we can all stand as a united front in that support, if that makes sense.
I have a question. Maybe Elizabeth or Emily, or perhaps it's someone on district staff. Can you help me understand what DMPS's relationships or experiences have been with general obligation bonds, maybe over the past few decades?
I believe the last time the district even submitted a GO bond was in 1989, and it was to build 2 new elementary school buildings. The last one was built in, I believe, the late 90s, 98, 99, and it was the elementary down by Easter Lake. That's the last time you ran a GO bond issue. I'm sure your GO bonds have been paid for a long time. You don't have a debt service levy
Thank you.
in place.
Which is very good. Does that automatically mean, like, our bond rating is high? That's about the most I know about bond ratings.
It will be a plus in your favor, but you do have sales tax revenue debt outstanding. So you still have outstanding debt.
I think that's another important fact for us to understand and for our community to understand. I have heard throughout the listening sessions that our community believes that the PEPL vote that was taken in 2020 or 2019 rather, was believed to be a bond out in the community, and that is not the case. So I don't know if other board members have also heard that from community members, but they are 2 very different things.
Just a clarifying question. Explaining the financing of the whole project is not something you'd ever put specifically in language. Like, and where I'm going is, like, so for instance, you know, the district in this project is putting in X percent for Pebble and X percent from SAVE, and the general, you know, the bond is X percent, like, kind of how you get to the total fund. That's more of a talking point probably than it is.
Correct. It is not something that goes in the ballot language at all. Like I said, you should not, projects that you know that are going to be funded with PEPL or sales tax, don't put those in the bond language, right? Just those projects that are going to be funded with bonds. But your overall plan, if these are our top 10 priorities, here's what they're going to cost, here's what they are, here's what they're going to cost, and here's our funding source. It's really pretty simple that way.
Are there, will we be blending funds or not so much? It's like, it's very black and white.
Yeah.
I mean,
don't
can
know.
you blend fund? I guess maybe.
Yes, you can blend-
And that
absolutely,
therefore,
you
though,
can
do you
blend
put it
funds.
on the list?
How you're going to fund you need to know how you're going to fund every project, because I don't think the GO bond will fund all of the projects.
That's correct.
Right.
So you're going to have to figure out, what are we going to do? And from each fund, I mean, you have to find a way to fund them or just not do them if you don't have the funding. But yes, you can absolutely say, and one of the things, it's a note in here, is if you need to issue sales tax revenue bonds for a project, then we now have since the last time you issued sales tax revenue bonds, which are payable from the SAVE dollars, there's now a hearing, sort of a reverse referendum process in place. You need to adopt a resolution setting forth the projects that will be funded, how many bonds you expect to issue, 100 million, whatever that amount is. And then the community has 2 weeks to submit a petition requesting an election. That election can only be held at a November election. So if you were to say, we're going to fund these 10 projects with GO bonds and sales tax revenue bonds, we're also going to have the public hearing for the sales tax revenue bonds this summer sometime.
And I think going back to the question you're asking about if you're blending funds or using multiple funds for a project, you do want to, I mean, you'll have to make sure that those projects are on your GO bond ballot question. You don't have to say how much.
No,
or
you don't have to say, I'm
something
going to
like
do 10% of this
Right,
project
yeah.
with GO bonds. You can do $1. You just have to, you can spend $1, just do the project.
Great.
Madam Chair,
Yes?
just another question. How can any board possibly be able to see how much something is going to cost 3 years from now? And I ask that because like there's no ability to raise the amount of money. You know, if we say this is going to cost $100,000 today and it ends up costing $700,000 tomorrow, we have no idea that that's going to happen. How, if there seems so much specifics that we have to put on the bond about how much we're going to spend, but there is no ability of a board to account for inflation.
The board, that is a great question. The board no one can accurately predict what construction inflation is going to do, but your architect, when they put together their probable opinion of cost estimate, they will include a construction inflation factor. That if we know we're going to phase this project over 3 years, and this project starts in 2025, this project starts in 2027, they will, in their cost estimate, have included a construction inflation factor based on an average of the last 3 years.
Great, thank you.
Elizabeth, if a bond were to fail the 60%, is there then a waiting period between when you can petition for another?
No, you can only put a general obligation bond question, well, there is de facto, you can only put a general obligation bond question on a November ballot of every year. So the next available election date would be November of '26, and you have to do the whole process over.
Okay.
But again, it's a federal election, so the deadline's moved up.
And the threshold's far higher.
Right, well, and then
Potentially.
the projects are more expensive too, right? Because you have another year of construction lost. So your projects are what, 3, 5, 10%? There for a while, they were construction inflation was running at about 20 to 25%. So,
Based on that, Beth, can you speak a little bit to November of 2025 and our current date? We're within reason of reaching a 2025 bond timeline completely. But I want to make sure that the board and Dr. Roberts and I are thinking through this completely. We've talked about, is November 2025 right the right time versus November 2026. And then you've actually just articulated a couple of reasons why November 2025 is a more opportune destination for us to reach as opposed to November of 2026. Is there some reason why we wouldn't go in November 2025 statutorily or legally?
No, the only reason would be if you don't know the scope and cost of your project, or you can't get it done in the next month.
Got it.
That would be about the only reason that would hold you up. Because if you feel rushed, your community's going to feel it too. But you've been working on this for a long time.
Board members, other questions specifically on the bond process? Dr. Roberts?
No, Madam Chair, this was very helpful. Thank you both for being here. It certainly shed a lot of light on some of the questions that we've had as a board and district team.
I'm curious about the April 1st, actually coming up with the petition and what it would say on the ballot. Is that done by board leadership? Is that done in work session? Is that, the board as a whole?
We usually work with the director of operations, Dr. Smith, whoever at the district is leading the plan and has been working with the architect and the funding and the financial advisor. We all get together and work on it. And like I said, we can work on it as, 8 hours a day, 3 hours a day, whatever it takes to get it done, we can make that happen. And I assume everyone else can too.
And you do your best, because I think I tried to be creative once and it didn't work. You do your best to try and make it, put whatever adjectives and descriptives that give life to that really awful legal language, right? Sorry. I mean, that's the hard, right?
It is hard. We try hard. For example, the community, if you are doing secure entrances, I think it's important, or security improvements, that's usually something you want to call out to the public because that's a big part of what you're doing, right? So we try to call out the highlights, or if there's an auditorium or something like that, that all politics are local. So if there is something at each building, we can write it however we need to write it, while still allowing flexibility.
I have just one question. And I'm going to have to go back to our role in talking about the bond, but not advocating for it. And so I think of our new voters and communities who might not be necessarily informed, but they're very much invested in maybe going to vote for the first time. How do you... I'm saying this because at one of the sessions, the reimagining education sessions that we had, our conversations with the community, people specifically were asking about property taxes. And, families might not understand what it is. And so how has it happened in the past, or how do you know if people are, instead of explaining, maybe advocating or promoting? Or how do you foresee that maybe happening here, considering new voters?
If the district were to put on informational sessions for voters, including a specific one for new voters, there is always a slide or something put together from your financial advisor that says, for a $100,000 home that you own in property taxes, this is how much this bond will cost you. Whether it's a dollar per thousand or, 30 cents per thousand, whatever it is. So you know how much this costs you each year on your property tax bill. There's an estimate.
And
They'll put
maybe
it
one
together.
thing I'll add to that, Maria, that I didn't say, it's not unusual that if DMPS calls for this bond referendum, then a completely separate entity of supporters for DMPS may stand up a standalone political
Action committee.
action committee that will run a campaign. And a huge part of their focus will be focused on advocating. So vote yes, but underneath that is all of the information as well. So does that, I mean, I think, and
That
just to
can
be,
happen.
just to be clear, what I think you're saying though is, as this board of volunteers, we can educate, but if we're out in the community, we can say, vote yes.
As long as you say, I'm Jackie Norris,
Yeah.
I'm here in my personal capacity, vote yes.
So, little,
Okay.
yeah.
Just identify yourself as being in your personal capacity,
Yeah.
if at all, as clearly as you can.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Clarifying question, but the superintendent or his designee does not have that same sort of flexibility. We can inform, but we should not attempt to influence.
When you're the superintendent, your job is basically 24/7, they said. So unless you very clearly identify that you're there in your personal capacity, which will be difficult because you'll be invited to speak at Lions clubs and lunches and things because you're the superintendent. In those events, you're the superintendent and you have to say, please go vote. Just don't expressly advocate, vote yes or vote no.
But you can still share all the factual
Yeah,
information.
just inf-
Absolutely.
I was going to say, and Beth and Emily, I don't know if we asked for it, if I was supposed to do that and I didn't. Would you mind, I don't know if that would be Miriam or the two of you, just guidance, written guidance for school board members, superintendent, and staff, just so everybody understands, like a teacher, so they understand what they're allowed to do. I think that would be helpful. So I don't know if,
We can probably get that. I think we have it.
okay,
We'll send it tomorrow.
great.
I do have a clarifying question. So if I am knocking doors in October and asking voters to vote for Jenna Knox, for example, I am there as Kim Martirano personally knocking for Jenna Knox and also vote yes for this bond. That is okay?
That is okay. You don't shed your First Amendment rights just because you're serving on a board.
Okay.
You still retain those in your personal capacity.
But if I knock on the door and I say, I'm Kim Martirano, I am the District 1 school board member, I am
Here,
here
please vote.
as a okay.
Or just say, I am this, but I'm here in my personal capacity, not as a board member.
Okay,
So I
thank
think
you.
we'll definitely put ourselves through some training. I think this is a good, we can go through different scenarios once we actually know what we're doing. Any other bond-related questions? It's good ones. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you guys
Thank
so
you.
much. So, did you?
No, I'm going to say a thought, just so I don't lose it, but it's kind of consistent. It was something Kim said, and we had this conversation. There's infrastructure, and there's programmatic.
Right,
Infrastructure is what's reflected,
in the bond.
right, in the bond. However, I think as a group, we have to decide, voter intent expects both. So when you're talking about a building and you're talking about a signature school, it means not just that the building is going to be retrofit for a signature school, it means that funding is going to be allocated for that signature school.
Right.
So, I mean, just as we think about what we're approving, we also have to make sure that we're actually approving the general fund dollars to follow through with the program. Maybe that's obvious to everybody else, but it is a commitment we're making because a building without program dollars is nothing.
Agreed. And I think you said it really, really well earlier, that the programmatic aspect of this reimagined plan is inextricably linked to the physical plant improvements and enhancements as well. because that's how the plan was developed. And so they are connected, though the bond language is not about programs.
Right.
Oh,
Well, Matt, Dr. Roberts, where do we want to go next?
Madam Chair, I think it would be helpful if we jump right into the presentation. Matt starts to talk through the PowerPoint that you have access to.
yeah, and the way the team and I sort of compiled this was one, to be responsive to your questions as time allowed. So you've got the Q&A in front of you. So that's there. I think it might be helpful to jump into question number 8 specifically, because it lifts up sort of process and sort of timeline of next steps that includes the November 25 bond. And so looking for your thought partnership
Do we
on
know
this.
if Patrick has this on?
We sent it to
Amanda
him,
said
so
yes. Thank
yes,
you.
okay, perfect, thank you.
Mr. Dix, we are on page 4 of 7.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So in question number 8, so there's not a slide dedicated to this. The slide is actually the bond, but these are dates within the bond timeline, if you will. So, for example, in April of 2025, also looking at the bond language itself, that would be where we come back with an established draft scope of the project as well as estimated costs. Again, that would be pulled. We have that, but again, we've just got the report back. So the committee needs to meet again. We need to make sure that we are making our modifications based on the feedback, and then we will adjust the project scope and the estimated cost for that. So we've got dates scheduled and time built in between now and April 1st to get to that. Again, just to highlight what Beth mentioned, these dates are not hard and fast dates, but we use them as milestones to make sure that we are tracking and that we are on schedule. The other thing I wanted to lift up about that too, because I think there was a question about that earlier on, is when we talk about project scope and estimated costs, we've already started building in those escalated costs throughout the 10 years. And so they are included. We've got it listed as today's current cost and estimated costs moving forward. So in addition to the April established project scope and estimated cost of the GO bond, we've also are recommending an enrollment analysis work session in working with our consultants with RSP. This is now our 3rd year of conducting an enrollment analysis, and we believe that that would be super, super important for the board to have a deep knowledge about as we are making decisions about the project itself, but also just about knowing our enrollment trends and what's happening within our community and across every attendance boundary zone.
Matt, just a question on that.
Yes.
How much does current events impact this update, and was that factored in? I just think about immigration trends, for example.
It was not factored in. This was data collected in the first semester and presented to us in February.
Oh, so it's current enrollment, not demographic.
Well, it's current enrollment, but it's also got projective analytics.
Okay, got it.
And so I think that's actually one of the reasons why we believe we should have a work session on this topic
Okay.
to talk about that.
Okay.
So stop me whenever you need. I'm just kind of working through the months here and what we are envisioning and sort of would like your feedback on. In May, of course, we've got some milestones also with the GO bonds, and you can sort of see them listed there. The work session there that we've articulated would be to review that draft petition language and to begin to circulate that amongst one another to make sure that we've got the language working in a direction that we need it to work when it's time to actually put it out for a petition. So again, just trying to meet milestones. Also in May, we talked about updating the board on the staffing, right? So staffing, this plan also has staffing implications, as we look at building schools and specific signature designations requires certifications, endorsements, and depending on what it is, Montessori, for example. But it also includes when staff move from one building to the next in a school retirement or closure, how does that work? So it's not only just about the staffing numbers, but also how are we actually supporting and serving staff in these endeavors and these transitions and these changes?
Go ahead.
Have any of those conversations already happened with buildings and building level staff? I think of the sixth grade transition, for example.
Some of those conversations have happened already. A conversation that just took place with building staff was with Walnut Street just last week. And so they're starting. So yes, they are happening. But we thought it would be good to have a specific conversation about that process and about when that would occur, what are those conversations like, and just to make sure that we're moving in the same direction.
Kind of consistent with what Kim's saying, and maybe you're going to get to this, there was clearly an incredible demand for better communication
Yes.
as soon as possible, as individualized as possible for individual students.
Schools, yeah.
So can you, at some point, can we go through that, the timing of those communications?
We
and
can,
how you're
yes.
planning on addressing that? Because that's a
Sure.
big piece too.
Well, and if helpful, maybe sort of to speak about that now, we've actually got, so there's some language in there about the communications of that that's in this, but I think what you're also mentioning is a little bit more specificity around specific schools and programmatic shifts and changes, like what's happening in the next 5 years with Diploma Plus, what's happening in their curriculum instructional, their academic environment as much as their physical plant environment. Is that also what you're?
It is, and I think it's trying to reconcile community expectations.
Sure.
And like, they're going to want everything, of course, right? We all would. And I think we have to be clear on how far we can go, because those types of specifics actually really impact how somebody may choose to vote.
Sure. Yeah, and that comment right there is actually part of
Okay,
what
good.
I think we also need to lift up when it comes to just signature programs in general.
Correct.
So.
And now teachers may be, I mean, equally the same, if not, so they both feel imminent in terms of needing to have those communications.
Sure, and I'm seeking to be pressed on my conservative approach to implementation of signature programs, so I'm looking forward to your feedback on that. When we get to June, we've got a couple of meetings there. We've talked about proposing, again, this is also activities, athletics, signature selection methodology, and timeline of lifting those up for specific topics to meet with the board at the board table for the public, to make sure that we are communicating those details to families in a manner that gives them the level of specificity that would allow them to vote with all the information in front of them.
To say what I think you just said, for example, on the 3rd of June, you would roll out or inform or do a presentation that includes the specifics.
Yes.
Got it.
That's correct. July, we began to hit, again, just circulation of the bond, that July 15th date, so those just listed there as milestones for you. When we get into August, and I'll show you the timeline here in just a second, that's mainly just signature school programming and expansion of CTE. And so we did hear a lot about that in the community feedback sessions in terms of wanting to know more. And so again, the report that you have is less than 24 hours old, and so we're just now going through it. And we'll be presenting it to the committee for their work with it the week of March 24th. So that sort of runs us through August. I'm going to keep going because then I'll get lost in these slides. And then in September, of course, we got the milestones mentioned there that Dr. Roberts stated around that September 1st, and then September 19th being, that's when it's sent off to the county auditor, and we're locked in at that point in time. So again, these dates and these topics were drafted as a tandem timeline that runs sort of parallel with the bond timeline, recognizing that we're getting to that point at the end of September where ideally a campaign is under full execution, and all of our staff and our community has all the information to the level of specificity that we can offer.
Matt, what I was pondering, assuming there's a decision to move forward,
Yes.
and there's a political action committee that chooses to stand themselves up and run a campaign in support of this, it would be really helpful to understand why bond referendums have succeeded or failed. And I think part of that has to do with specificity and how early the specifics are out there.
Yeah.
So for instance, a question for other people might be, learning, and this is not what you're saying, but if it's not until September that there's details on signature schools, is that too late?
Right.
So just want to encourage that conversation to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly the press that I'm looking for. So if I can, I'm going to jump a couple slides into this because it speaks to the signature program, which that's been the largest topic of discussion as
Correct.
In my interactions with the community.
Matt, I think we should also, even as we think about some of the survey data that we've gathered.
Yes, sir.
Very impressive and encouraging data from the survey responses around signature schools, right? I'm looking for 75th percentile, 70th percentile, somewhere around there, or 60th percentile.
60th percentile.
Percentile. Okay, so that'd be helpful.
A,
In favor of, or
Yeah,
excited about.
strongly agree in that. So these are very quick slides, then we can jump to sort of the timeline aspect of this. But just to make sure that I'm speaking consistently, is that the implementation of or standing up a signature program or a magnet school, if you will, which is the national sort of phrase of that, the best practice frameworks will say that it's about a 5 to 7 year process to stand it up. That includes the gathering the data, doing the needs assessments, making sure that you've got staff trained and things like that. So that is the full, from inception until you're fully implemented, is 5 to 7 years. So, and it's got, in this particular framework, and this comes from the U.S. Department of Education from a 2018 document that was placed out there, there are 4 stages of planning. So what my ask is, and my press is, and is what we would engage in these 4 stages, and how quickly we engage in these 4 stages is actually the real question for us, related to your question, Jackie, about the bond and how specific can we get. And so there are 6 elements of signature schools, everything from leadership to communication. So again, just making sure that we are working from an established best practices framework. There's 5 core signature components. That includes the diversity and equity of it, and making sure that we are not exclusionary signature programs, that we are fully inclusive for all students and all families, and of course, managing the enrollment. And so I do want to say something real quick about that. The economy of scale when it comes to enrollment is super important in this, meaning that as we stand up, for example, the Montessori program at Jackson that's been identified there, having an economy of scale of student enrollment there meeting, that 550, that 600, 650 number is important, because if it doesn't withhold that number, then students are choosing a comprehensive program, most likely, where they weren't designed for that capacity. So we got to guard against building a school for 200 children or 300. We've got to make sure that the economy of scale is there, which is part of that infrastructure build out. So just putting that out there in terms of enrollment management.
You go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Matt. And I think even as so 3 thoughts. The first is, and you pointed this out, I think it's important for us to continue to anchor how we approach implementation in a proven framework, building on the data from the U.S. Department of Ed and other credible spaces I've shared. A magnet school / signature school takes about 5 years to implement. We have to reconcile that, and I would love to hear the conversations from this board to the district's team. How do we reconcile working within this framework, 5 years, with responding to the needs and the asks that we've heard from community members? One of those needs and asks has been, I've heard this from many board members, why would I vote for and invest in a program that my children will not benefit from? Because 5 years, I do not have 5 years. My child will be out of the Montpelier Public Schools in 3 years. If I'm going to support your Reimagine Education plan, I want to know what will be the benefit to me. And then thirdly, I think what the district team is asking for today as well is to hear from the board. What are some thoughts I'm wondering, do you have about how will the board work within this really credible and established framework versus trying to meet the needs of individuals who are saying, signature schools are way too far down the road. We just don't want to wait. Can we do something differently?
Can I just echo a couple things? One is when Beth was talking about what you really want to see achieve, you put within your first 5 years. And when I look at the things that we're projecting out, year 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that gives me a lot of concern. And that anyone listening would possibly have concern with, are these things really going to happen? What you've slated for 6, 7, which is a lot of the exciting stuff, right? That's the signature schools. And I think we need to think about that, is what is our commitment to delivering? And the language in the bond and all of that's going to be really important. I think the other thing is the reality of, and I appreciate the Department of Ed saying, think through things. This is probably how it used to work. We're in a new reality where how many charter schools are popping up all around us in a year, and they're pushing hard. And I'm supposed to watch this video from the new high school. It's following me on Facebook. I've seen it 10 times, right? I don't want to put my information in to watch it, but I need to. And I think that's just the reality, is that, yeah, there's credibility, but I think we're trying to do something big and take a risk. And I think maybe we need to push ourselves to realize that 5 years from now, we're going to lose people 5 years from now.
I really want to echo that. Thank you. Skylar and I just came from a meeting, and Ankeny's turning a building around in 2 years, brand new building, Innovation Hub. And they took a year to think about it. So I think a kind of a charge would be, maybe we need to, I'm going to say this nicely, why is it taking us so long? And one of the questions is, are we appropriately dedicating the right staff to swap team? I mean, this is, you think about how corporate America does it, right? I mean, they stand stuff up because they're laser focused on it. And so I really appreciate that comment. The other thing I was just going to ask, again, sorry to bring Ankeny back into this, but we were just there. They're really designing their buildings for nimbleness. They're not designing a building for a Health Sciences Academy, just say. The rooms that they're creating, right, with light and, they're multi-purpose. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility based on demand. So I think our biggest conversation as a board with you, Matt, and with everybody is going to be the timeline.
I just want to echo the resources comment, because I was quickly skimming the questions and perhaps I missed the answer in here, but reading that we haven't allocated really anything to this project, I mean, that's just not true. I know there's a lot, but also you can't do everything, right? And so I do think that is a valid thing that we need to think about, is if there are not dedicated staff, do we need to consider having it, and how do we do that?
Yeah, I completely agree. On question number 4, in the Q&A, there are 3 pathways sort of lifted. The third pathway is what I hear you saying is, let's change the timeline up to actually advance the implementation and standing up signature programs. And so that's what pathway number 3 sort of articulates.
Can I maybe?
Please.
Maybe this is the question. What's the highest and best use of time, talent, and money in each region that will yield the greatest results? So don't think about construction, I'd love to hear the answer to that. Don't think about construction intricacies and all of those other interdependencies, which I'm sorry, Dave, because I know it's not that easy, but really, what are the wow, that's going to impact student outcomes or impact people's outlook on our district? And what 2 things could get done in 3 years, or 3 things can get done in 3 years? And I just, I don't know, that's just a comment.
Yeah, Madam Chair, so I really appreciate that, and certainly also appreciate a comment by Board Member Knox around what is in some people's minds appearing to be one of our competitors, and how they are moving expeditiously towards standing up schools. I also want to point out, though, that I think the approach that Des Moines Public Schools that we've taken on over the last 16 months is one that is an exemplar. And what we have seen is across the country, individuals who have embarked upon similar endeavor because they are responding to decline in enrollment. They have not considered two of the tenets that we have anchored our work in. One is we are prioritizing people over our properties, right? So it's not just about building. We're thinking a lot about how does this impact people? And then the second is, what are those programmatic changes we're going to make that puts us at the forefront of excitement? And so that's what I'm hearing from the board. You've heard me say over and over again that even with this plan that is grounded in so much thoughtfulness, we are going to have to develop a strong appetite to be nimble, right? You know, when we hear about other school systems that are neighboring school districts that are doing some things in a much quicker way, we certainly want to heed that. But also not lose the credibility of these strong frameworks we've looked at, iterating and looking at demographic studies. So we have to find that balance, which is one of the reasons that we've been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, and also, I just want to say, like, we know how to do this. Like, look at Central Campus, right? Look at Central Academy, look at Coles Montessori, look at, I just think it's like confidence. Like, let's not overthink some of this stuff because Des Moines has a history of doing it and doing it well.
Yeah, no, what you are lifting up is actually what I'm asking for, which is like, if we believe that actually advancing signature school programming and the building enhancements is the right thing to do in the first 5 years, we can get that done, but it will do exactly what you articulated, which is we will need to reallocate resources to that and actually make sure that that is first priority. So your question around like, what are the top two things? Like, we've started thinking about that already. And so question 15, I think, is that question.
And can I just ask you, like, when we step back and talk about our why, right? And remember, we had a lot of conversations about student outcomes. We had conversations about district competitiveness. And there were conversations about, middle school versus high school versus elementary school. I think if you had to synthesize the, it's like synthesize all of these goals, right? Student outcomes and connected to signature schools or other things. In each district, what is that? Because I think only you know that blending of the youth that we're trying to pull in, the outcomes, proven research-based models, et cetera.
I just have a comment. I think that to keep this momentum going with putting stuff in the schools, but then I'm also thinking of our teachers and our staff. How are we gonna ask them to pivot so quickly? So do we have schools that you feel that are our signature schools? Do you feel that they are probably ready to start some of the programming early on and then gradually moving up?
Sure, and there are. I mean, we've got signature programs happening now, right, in terms of Montessori, IB. We do have project-based learning. We've got artful learning schools. So we've got actually examples of that. What I have on there on the slide is just a simple sort of slide of just, again, looking at staff training and development, because what makes the signature programs in any school work is timely professional learning and professional development for the staff so that they are ready to receive the students within the theme or within, the culture that we're creating there. What follows that is the example of grade transitions by cohort that are become immersed in that over time. So it's just an implementation model. Again, that's super high level. We're just using Jackson Montessori as an example for this. But I guess to your question, Ms. Campos, is that absolutely, we have schools that are ready for that. And we actually can advance that and we can accelerate that. It's just a matter of making sure that we're all moving forward with the priorities of what we're advancing in those first 5 years and knowing what we're going to put off for the next 5.
Matt, I feel like we're taking you all over the place
No,
on
this
this
is
wonderful
perfect.
journey of questions. I want to make sure that this is as helpful as possible for you. Where, we started with the calendar and then we moved away from the calendar. Do you want to keep down the conversation we're having, or do you want to come back to the calendar? How can we make sure we?
Well, so can I maybe, thank you for that. What I hear is that there's a strong sentiment that we advance the timeline to include the development of signature programs earlier on in the 5 years. And what we can do is run back with that, with the committee, and with obviously Dave and his expertise and that of our consultants to change that timeline to reflect that. Because that's going to be important, right? Because it determines the scope that we present to you in April and the project scope and the estimated cost. That might look a little different with that, which is great. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. So that answers that question.
Board, what do you, I just want to make sure, so say that again. So you're,
Go ahead. Go ahead. No,
well, I just want to make sure that we get feedback from the board, so expectations are the
please.
same. So your hope would be on April 1st-ish.
April 1st-ish.
Yeah.
That we would be able to come back with project scope and estimated cost that reflect a 5-year investment in standing up signature programs in our regions, in each of the regions.
Matt, that's only in a couple weeks.
Correct. Well, and we're there with the current draft. It would take some modifications of that. And then it's just crunching numbers at that time and working with the committee to make sure that that we're not missing anything about it. But so even the draft plan that's out there right now, we have a project scope and we have estimated cost already drafted for this. It just gets modified based on changes that we make.
Ms. Martirano?
My wondering is around, and I believe that you have it in the presentation, and we just haven't gotten there yet, but the identification of what those signature schools look like. So are we just saying high level, advancing and moving signature schools up in the timeline without having that level of specificity around what Hoover and Meredith campus will look like and hold and specialize in?
Yeah, for April, yes, because we
Okay.
wouldn't, between this time and April, identify, but.
When
yeah.
do you think you would have that
Well,
specificity?
hearing the urgency around that, we would actually work to have that done here in the next couple of months. It'll change our priorities in terms of where we're spending our time, which is great. I mean, it gives us real focus. With the idea being that we need to go into the summer months with folks having a pretty good understanding of what the school designations would be.
I think it's worth, everybody thinking about that, maybe checking with a few other people. That's, when you look at the history of bonds and kind of some of the things, when you look back at Cedar Rapids and where some of the hiccups were, people just felt like they didn't have enough specifics. And so that's just one thought. I think it's worth everybody thinking about it. But, it's easy for people to oppose things if they have a reason to oppose it.
Sure.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Dix?
I guess I would, Matt, and I can't speak for my board colleagues, but I would really lift up something else that was just discussed. And that is that this isn't just about shuffling the deck so that one priority goes in place of another. This is about a real reflection for me about changing the gear that we have traditionally operated in order to make these priorities come true. And so I would say a priority for me would be to meet the marketplace. And I understand we're doing things differently, and I understand that we are doing them more thoughtfully. I think we already have done that. But I guess I would ask for a real reflection on how quickly we can get some of this done and push ourselves to do it so that we can get as much done as fast as we can.
Dr. Mayberry Mays?
Yeah, I'm still thinking through this, but some initial thoughts. I appreciate the urgency outlined in question 15. I do think that there has to be something visible, whether that's additions to buildings, something. I love the signature piece of it, but I don't know if we're jumping too far ahead of this with signature, or are there other components of Reimagine Education that might be more of a priority? Signature is extremely attractive, but I brought this point up before, and maybe it's just because I'm on the south side, but there was an attraction to building an additional terminal to the airport because people see it. If it would have just been programs or services within the airport terminal, I'm not sure people would have been as excited about it. So while I am excited about the signature programs in the schools, if there are other pieces to reimagine education that might be more visible or attractive, I might lean that way a little bit more. But like I said, these are just some initial thoughts without a whole lot of
Can I give an
process.
example to see if we're, so you're saying, and I'm just going to pick, I don't want to pick any school, because school A, right? So if school A becomes a K-8 IB school, even if there's no infrastructure changes, that is where you're preferring? I want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that the programmatic element is less exciting than the infrastructure element? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm
Yes,
trying
yeah.
to,
That's what I'm saying. And like I said,
even a building that's completely transforming to have one focus, one programmatic focus.
well, if the building's transforming, I think that would be.
May not be physical infrastructure. It
Sure,
might just
that's
be.
fair. Yeah, that's fair. I think if, I was looking at the South region piece of this
Oh, got it.
specifically. And
So maybe we'll just keep it high level, because I think that's a good
Yeah.
point, and each region may be different, right? Or each example may be different. I mean, I do think this feedback is going to be important for you to process and think about, again, like highest and best use of dollars, time, and talent, to have something that will have either the greatest impact or forward movement.
And I do think, based on like just the project scope that we've already got just drafted, seeing that and the level of investment in that first 5 years, I think will help answer a lot of those questions of what are the physical plant changes that would be visible from the streets, in addition to the programmatic changes that are happening within the walls. Because the project scope in a plan this big, that's why it's 10 years, is quite large.
So I think one of my challenges that I find with this plan is like, what are we trying to, like, what's our number one priority we're trying to achieve? And I feel like that's why we're going in circles right now too, because with my parent hat on, I'd rather send my kid to a really cool program school versus care if they have an extra classroom, right? I mean, I think, so we all come at it from our different perspectives, and then there's the voters, right? You want to appease the voters, then you better have action going, right? Or if you want to try to keep enrollment in, what does that look like? And so I think that's, are we trying to have better buildings? I mean, I think these are all the, like, what is our number one priority? And are we trying to improve student outcomes, Kim? Like, what is our number one priority? And then what is the best investments to get to our number one priority with all the other considerations?
Yeah, Board Member Knox, thank you for that. I think, let me start by responding immediately to that question. And I don't believe there's any disagreement in terms of what we would consider to be our number one priority, and that is just really cultivating a pre-K-12 education space that offers exciting, state-of-the-art, world-class instructional and academic opportunities to students. Regardless of what building that happens in, just is something else for us to think about. And so we want to make sure that we are maintaining that competitive edge. In this market, in the pre-K-12 market, it is really competitive. We want the Des Moines Public Schools to be that destination of choice for every single eligible student and parents. And so we have to sort of, as I shared earlier, reconcile that with a really thoughtful reimagined education plan that has a much longer runway. But what I'm hearing, and which is really exciting for us to hear, we've talked about this offline, we have to think about what is it that our parents and students in the community is asking for, and when. And so to your charge around reallocating time, resources, and money in a manner that pushes us to expedite some of the work we're doing is something we're going to take back to the team and come back to the board with whatever adjustments that we've made. So for us, it's, as a district, is going to be balancing, maintaining fidelity to the work of 16 months, right, that is really thoughtful and grounded in research, and let's meet the needs of students and parents much faster than we have laid out in the plan right now.
Listening to, yeah, go ahead.
No, good.
Well, I'm thinking about the 5-year comment. I'm thinking about how far it is to plan, like 10 years out, right? And yet, we have to, right, based on the life cycle of how long it takes to do something, Matt. And so I'm just wondering if a starting point is that you've now been asked, take a look at the plan, and what would the first 5 years look like? And then you could still kind of vision what would be the next phase, kind of like a phase 1, phase 2. But in all of our excitement and energy, there's going to have to be some serious budget conversations that are equally as important, because if we can't project to fund those, then we've just disappointed voters as well. And so I don't know when that conversation happens, and quite honestly, if it should start happening in this budget cycle, in terms of making sure that we're putting money to actually execute projects quicker, but there's simultaneous paths.
Charge received. We will plan to come back to the board over the next 30 days or so with a series of updates, reactions, and pivots as we sort of have landed on as a team. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, and I don't know when you want to do this, but like I think about this, right? So you've gotten, you congratulations, you did all those meetings, now you have this feedback, and you're going to take the feedback, take the committee through the feedback. I assume at that point, it'll also be, everything will be publicly available online for people to review the raw and the themes and all of that
Yeah, this will all be available by the end of the week.
by the end of the week. And then how do you recommend taking the public along this communications journey as well?
Yeah.
And what should they expect next? And maybe you just need to regroup and think about that a little bit, but.
Well, I think we will, based on even just the conversation that we just had about timeline. I think that's going to inform some how we go back out to the community. With the sentiment of here's what you said, so here's what we've done in light of this conversation as well. And so I think that we probably will need to adjust maybe what we're thinking to make sure that we're communicating efficiently and effectively with everyone.
Matt, are you hearing that also from
That's the question.
that's what
yeah.
I was
That's the
wondering.
question. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
community? Like, I think all 7 of us would have a little bit, as Jenna identified, we're all going to have a little bit different take on the path that we should take. And this is where the power is, in my opinion, is from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of voices that we've heard from, and identifying the themes that are bubbling up to the surface from our community. So I would like to hear a recommendation based on that community engagement and feedback from the community, and say, the community engagement feedback compiled with the data that we have, compiled with the research that we have, this is the recommendation that we have for the board moving forward. And if that is an expedited timeline on the signature schools, then I stand behind that.
It's a great point, thank you. Yeah.
So I don't know what the plan is to dive into this analysis of all of the feedback, but I would appreciate that approach.
I just want to add one more thing to that, which would be, and then looking at the district financial health and direction and like how that overlays. Because again, that's what this is all about, right? There's a number of ways to ensure that we are financially healthy, right? There's a lot of ways to do it. This is the ideal way, but making sure that we have identified those priorities and why we believe that this is going to help us reach those goals.
Ms. Martirano, you asked a question, which is the best way to process this. So the best way to process this is obviously just to sit and read it. And then how are you're going to take the committee through this as well?
We will.
And then kind of coming back to the board, maybe as the next step with a lot of inputs, right? It's kind of like the theory of change. I think, that everybody's like, all the different inputs now that lead you to this particular set of recommendations.
Agreed. And just, again, we haven't even had this 24 hours yet, so just kind of looking through it.
Right.
There's, anecdotally, even in the sessions, in general, the vast majority of people agree, like, we need to do this. It's the level of detail of prioritization that the feedback will allow us, that will drive some changes. And to Kim's point, it's going to be absolutely critical that we are so transparent around, here's what you said in the data that's in front of you, and this is why that's a justification for making a change or not making a change in the plan.
Correct, but overlaid with your educational expertise.
Agreed.
The data of the
Agreed.
district, the age of the buildings, the financial
100%.
health. Yeah.
Yes.
Matt, I don't know if you can answer this question, but going through this, we had like a couple sessions with Spanish speaking and other languages. Did they translate this, or did one of our staff members that were there, like our BFLs, did they help translate this
They
for him?
did.
Okay.
Yes. No, one of our folks didn't necessarily help. In some cases, they did, right there on the spot, in certain engagements. Others, CISO had it translated.
Okay. And do you know, are they separated on here, or is it just everything?
I don't believe it is, but again, I haven't gone through it
Okay.
with a fine tooth comb yet.
Okay.
So.
Can I just say one thing? And I understand that you're gonna go back to the committee and bring this, and I completely agree.
I completely agree with Ms. Martorano that the community, that we have to listen to our community. I also would like to say that I very much support your point, Mr. Mayberry. Mace, doctor, in that, so I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think of how do we help families believe that public schools truly could be beneficial to our children. And I think that a lot of times families, parents, students might attend some sessions and they might listen and they might ask questions and they might not, and then they will leave and the information is forgotten. And so, in my community, we have this saying, hay que ver para creer. Let's see to believe. You have to see to believe. Because to a lot of families, and, in almost the 4 years that I've been doing this, what I hear is, la gente es muy buena para hablar. Like, people are really good at talking. And then there is not a whole lot happening, right? And so infrastructure, I think, is really important because people see that. And that is one way that we can show families that we truly are serious, interested in keeping our word. Because I think that a great plan was presented, at these sessions. But at the end of the day, to many of our families, it's just words. So how can we help families see that DMPS is keeping, right, their word? And here, we have this to offer to you, while at the same time sharing programmatically what we're planning on doing. not leaving that aside, because we have a lot of exciting changes. But we as a district do not always make it like a priority to make a lot of noise about that. And so we miss a lot, and families miss a lot, and families end up relying on the people that voice opinions, that write an email, that come to these forums. I think that we have to just maybe be more objective. How can we help families just see? Que vean para que crean. Let them see so they can believe.
You know, something I really appreciate about what you just said is along the way to get to where you're going, which may take 3 or 4 years, what are visible things that show that the district is moving in the right direction? So I think about the cell phone policy, right? I mean, that's a visible public demonstration of, you know, something that we think will impact academic outcomes. And so in much the same way, are there other things that continue to show, you said this, we heard you, we delivered, to get to that point, right? Because it's going to take a while. So I've been thinking a lot about that too. You know, what is that? What are those things that demonstrate a different, you know, kind of a different direction, or a forward movement that maybe people haven't seen in the past?
I wanted to say,
Just kind of going on, Jenna kind of mentioned it before about, seeing all over social media, and I kind of was wanting to sign up too, to look at this charter school. So even with our communications departments, getting that conversation, grabbing the people's attention. One thing that the airport did, I'm there every single day, and I see the change. But one thing they did that big, humongous DSM sign, and that just captures people. So I think it's not a conversation probably today, but with our communications department, seeing if when we do those little small changes, have those little blog posts or things on social media to still grab those families' attention.
Agreed.
I just wanted to offer, I really appreciate Ms. Alonso's comment, because I had been sitting here trying to figure out what was I trying to say that just didn't come, something didn't click the way I said it, and so I really appreciate that. And I think there's one statistic that I continue to come back to, and that's, I think, what's grounding me in, and I agree with Kim, I would much rather the data support the direction, but one statistic that I often come back to, and I think it's more of a lens of equity around what's happening and what happens next. Because like you said, there are certain people that speak up more often, but I don't want the ones who don't speak up more often not to have a true voice at the table. And what that statistic or whatever it is that I remember at a community listening session at Lincoln High School, we talked about functional capacity of that building. And I believe the number was there's 1,500 functional capacity and there are 2,400 students. So when you think about that, and then you prioritize a signature program at Studebaker, that's what I continue to come back to. Is that the most important thing, the signature programs? And I know it's not that black and white for sure, but the people that are maybe in those spaces, are they not speaking up enough? Are they not heard enough? Or is it just, you've been dealing with it, just continue to deal with it, meanwhile we're going to add some Montessori programs somewhere else?
Totally, that resonates really, really well, because that same sentiment of capacity holds true at Studebaker, right? They're bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
And so it's 100% to your point, I hear. It's probably worth noting too that on page 14 of the report that we just received, under the proposed changes of the Reimagining Education Plan, 80% support constructing classroom additions and collaboration spaces, in terms of the respondents. 61% support change in the district grade configuration. So these are, I mean, obviously some of the data points that we'll need to utilize in terms of prioritization. But when I think about like seeing is believing, some of it is just physical plant seen, and some of it is, how are we showing up in terms of our building a different culture, in terms of the policies and the procedures and aspects of our work. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that piece, because I do think, and I was thinking, Maria, and I don't know, you think about culture, 3 different regions, different, how do you build community, right? So you start thinking about these regions. That's a new community, and so is that a place to start gelling around or building culture around, or really thinking through communication strategies to get to reach more effectively the populations in the regions? I don't know, but I want to be respectful of time, so I'm going to just ask all board members if there's a closing comment or question. Ms. Murderon, I'll start with you.
If I may I just make a comment regarding Ms. Alonso's statement
yeah.
first? And a lot of what you said, Maria, I think comes back to communication around what's actually happening. And I want to be really cautious about putting forth a charge to prioritize those things that are big and flashy and seen versus communicating what's actually happening. Because for board members who were here during the construction of, I don't even want to say the word.
Yeah.
No, a community stadium, we heard from a lot of community members that they didn't want the big flashy thing. They wanted the programmatic changes here within our existing structures. So I just want to be really cautious about the need for improved communication with our constituents and our community versus the need for the something to be seen visually.
Such a balance, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great point. I mean, it's a balance, I think.
Overall, I think my closing comments would be I'm incredibly excited about what is possible for Des Moines Public Schools, and the support that and the outpouring of support that we've received from our community. I think during the sessions that you had, Matt, you gave three options. We could do nothing. We could go in this route. And no one that I've talked to has said, no, doing nothing is absolutely not an option. Overwhelmingly, I've heard from the community that we have to do something, and we have to do something bold. And that's the charge that this board gave you a couple of years ago. And I just want to thank you and Amanda and Dave and the entire committee for all that you've done to get us to this point, and I'm really excited about the potential that we have in the coming months. So thank you. Looking forward to diving into all of this.
Dr. Mayberry Mays?
Yeah,
Then we'll go next to Mr. Dix.
Yep. I'll keep mine really brief. I'm excited about it as well. I appreciate the openness to being urgent, and that's what I would probably offer.
Thanks.
Mr. Dix?
I guess after listening to the conversation, I challenge my board colleagues' thinking and the staff's thinking and the public's thinking about this. If you had polled the board members of Blockbuster Video, as Dr. Roberts has told us so many times, on whether a new video service that brought streaming into our homes every day would be what we should invest in, they would have voted it down, and in fact they did. And I think what we're asking for here is not, I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking about what do we need today just to survive, instead of thinking boldly about what we can do. And so I guess I would just, as we think about what our priorities are, how we go about it, how can we push ourselves to think differently about this entire project. I am incredibly excited about it. I think it's the way we should go. And there will be trip ups along the way. But I think it is, that should not stop us from going with our best speed forward.
Ms. Alonso? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I am really excited about seeing DMPS be the place to be, the place to stay. We have to just continue to consider how we promote DMPS and what it's doing and going to do. And it's great work that you're doing. Thank you.
I think it was, I can't remember offhand if I was at 4 or 5 of these meetings. And the community came out in a lot of them. We had the same conversations as all of them. And I feel that we're on the right path, but I don't want us to lose the focus of our goals and guardrails and what we really need in our students, our vision and values. Which with this mainstream, I think it's going to be awesome. And so I'm on board, and like the people that were there at the meetings, Amanda, Dave, the BFLs, I could name everybody. I just want to thank all of them publicly for taking their time and doing this and being so passionate, because you talk to a lot of these people on the committee and they are passionate about what's going on in Des Moines and in DMPS. So just thanks to all of them.
Try one more time.
I
There you go.
I
Yeah.
I always enjoy these conversations with you all, board, because it's like you go this way, this way, this way, this way, and it's so interesting. But I think two things that I want to sort of echo what you said, Maria. I guess build on beyond just see it to believe it. I think it's also about being heard, and I think another reason people can leave a big district is because you get lost and your voice isn't heard. And what is the way that anyone can hear and respond to me? And so I think we have a lot of voices here, and I think it is very important, to your point, Kim, that we listen to them. I do think we need to drill down. It would be very helpful to drill down to understand of the online survey, how many of them are families, how many of them are people who can even vote for this thing versus God love our staff, but if they don't live here, you can't vote for it. I mean, all of these kinds of things. So, but I do want to note why you are right. 60% of respondents said that they supported signature schools, and you should see breaking that down between support and strongly support. 92% of people supported preparing students for successful futures after graduation, and that was our largest percentage. And so I think regardless of the path that we go down, we need to keep that in the forefront of what we're trying to do. At the end of the day, we need to deliver on better students or better outcomes for our students. And I don't know the right way to get there, but I just challenge us all to remember keeping that in the forefront of our conversations and as we move forward.
I mean, I just say again, thank you so much. This has been a lot of work for a lot of people, and it's really exciting, and I'm so excited to hear the board so excited about it. I think if I could make any comment, it would be for us to think about how we can behave more like a business in our ability to execute something. Obviously, a business that has core values and empathy, but it's a competitive marketplace. And we have great ideas, and so I'd rather do fewer things, but nail them and get them done quicker. And if we need to reallocate funding and staff and the way that you're thinking about FY26 to get there, maybe that's the conversation we need.
We're in an Amazon world, everyone. Everyone expects it to be at their door in 3 hours. I mean, that's just the reality of the world that we operate within now. And I think we have to be responsive to that.
And our people want to stick with us. I mean, that is the one thing. We have so many people who love and value public schools. And so to the degree that we can tee them up for them, that would be great. Closing comments, Dr. Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to do this in 30 seconds. I'm hoping that some of my colleagues and the DMPS leadership team really feels exactly what I'm experiencing right now from this work session, listening to the board, listening to your charge, but more importantly, really pushing our thinking, and that is I am really energized, right? I'm energized because in addition to just this incredible amount of data that we have, the recently released engagement report and summary, and just conversations that we continue to hear from community members tells us that we are on the right track. But I think it's implementation that will make the difference, right? What do we do next to ensure that we remaining true to the vision and mission the board has outlined, and doing so in a thoughtful way to give us the competitive edge? At the last of 19 community meetings at Lincoln High School, sophomore Jose, he might be listening because he says he engages with some of the meetings. He came up to me. Oh, Matt saw him. We were taking pictures. And
He
the
came
fir-
to a couple of meetings.
Right,
Okay.
right. The first.
Hi, Jose, if you're watching.
His question to me was, what did you have to do to become a superintendent? And what I want us to take away from that, because what I took from that was not even about the superintendent position. He said he's been looking at myself and other adults in this district, and he wants to know what does he have to do to be successful. Jose is Spanish País, Mexico. And he shared that with me. And one of the things he wondered was, whether or not essentially his zip code or who he is will determine whether or not he can achieve success of becoming a superintendent. And I remember telling him no. And I gave him a little bit of an outline about what he has to do to make all of this possible. And when you ask, what is this plan about? That's what this plan is about.
Yeah.
The 90% board member knocks that you just referenced, that says our families are asking for us to have a school system that prepares every single child who knock on our doors to success. That's what this plan is about. And whether we maintain fidelity to the 10-year length of the plan, but also balancing that, as I shared earlier, with a little bit of urgency around giving Jose, who's a sophomore and only experienced 2 years of this reimagining education, give him an opportunity and a shot to feel that. So we've gotten our charge, and the Reimagining Education Committee and the rest of the DMPS leadership team, we're off to the races. And the city of Des Moines, please know that we will continue to strive valiantly to become the destination of choice for every single child who is of age in preschool through 12 to be a part of this amazing work. So that's where we are. So thank you, Matt and team. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right, good job. Board members, why don't we take a 5-minute break? And then we're going to go into closed session. Rosie has graciously gotten food. Should that be of interest to you now, just so everybody's aware, there'll be 2 closed sessions. So the first one we will begin, we'll have Miriam here. I'm going to follow you out just a minute. Yeah. Patrick, are you on? Was he on? Did you see him?
Yes, he was on.
Okay, he might just be on.
Make sure that he's not on the other session.
Kyle, thanks so much.
Yeah, he left the public link and then he went into the, he hasn't gotten the closed session link yet.
Okay,
So I've joined the closed session, so he can now join if somebody can text him.
got it. I'll tell him to join.
Okay.
Thanks, Kyle. I grabbed yours. I was going to give it to somebody to
Oh, no,
read.
you're fine.
Right?
We'll call roll again.
Yeah.
Of course, only speak the truth.
I saw him at me on Facebook too.
Before we go into closed session?
had a
Facebook.
Okay.
We used to get all of his Facebook that's like the official to.
Well, we're going to start, and Maria is probably on her way in. So let's start with roll. Ms. Rios, will you take roll, please?
Yes, you can call them special session to order.
I would like to call the school board's special session to order. Ms. Rios, would you please take the roll?
Of course. Ms. Alonso? Here. Ms. Campos? Here. Mr. Dix?
Here.
Ms. Knox? Here. Ms. Martirano?
Here.
Dr. Mayberry Mays?
Here.
Ms. Norris?
Here.
Perfect, we have
Okay,
one.
we have quorum. So I'm going to entertain a motion now for us to go into closed session.
Do we
Sorry, can we
have
approve the agenda?
Oh, do we have an agenda?
Yes.
Oh. Oh, do you want me to follow this? Sorry. See, I usually am here ahead of time, so I read everything. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Martirano, so moved.
We have a
Alonso,
motion by
second.
Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Alonso. Board members, please cast your votes. Mr. Dix?
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. I'd like to now entertain a motion for us to go into closed session. Skylar?
I move that the board go into closed session per Iowa Code Section 21.5A, which states a governmental body may hold a closed session only by affirmative public vote of either 2/3 of the members of the body or all members present at the meeting to review or discuss records which are required or authorized by state or federal law to be kept confidential or to be kept confidential as a condition for that governmental body's possession or continued receipt of federal funds, and 21.5C, to discuss strategy with counsel in matters that are presently in litigation or where litigation is imminent, where its disclosure would be likely to prejudice or disadvantage the position of the governmental body in that litigation.
We have a motion. Thank you. Ms. Martirano, we have a motion by Dr. Mayberry Mays, a second by Ms. Martirano. Ms. Rios, would you please take the vote?
Yes. Ms. Alonso?
Yes.
Ms. Campos? Yes. Mr. Dix?
Yes.
Ms. Knox? Yes. Ms. Martirano?
Yes.
Dr. Mayberry Mays?
Yes.
Ms. Norris?
Yes, the motion passes 7-0. We have no members of the public in here. Does Kyle stay or does Kyle leave?
Kyle leaves, if you can give him just a couple.
Yep.